Good morning. How's everyone doing? I am well aware that I'm standing between you and lunch. And so I'll be speedy and make sure that, um, we'll finish on time. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very excited to come all the way from Hong Kong to speak to you on a very favorite topic, digital trust. I actually grew up in Toronto, not too far from here. But I've been spending the last 30 years in Asia, based myself in Hong Kong at the moment. It's quite an interesting comparison between what is happening in Asia as compared to what is happening here in North America, and I'll explain a bit more about those differences. So I don't have a disclaimer, but obviously everything that I said today represent myself and not the opinion of the University of Waterloo or ISACA. So there you go. Let's go right into it. So where do I have the point? The other one. Okay. All right, good. So just to let you know a little bit about the UWCISA, because some of you may not be familiar with it. University of Waterloo is located about 120 kilometers west of Toronto. And this is where I graduated from. And I recently took over as chairman of the Research Center for Information Integrity and Information Systems or Assurance. And as you can see that we actually use the acronym UWCISA, so we're closely connected to the CISA program of ISACA as well. Very simple, we actually do a lot of research work surrounding information integrity and information systems assurance. Our executive director, Professor Ephraim Boris, I think many of you know him, has been around since day one. He has been very active for over 25 years with this center. And I'm very privileged, to be working with him at the moment. ISACA, of course, many of you know quite well, I'm sure. We have got a few legends here. In fact, we have at least 3 Hall of Famer from ISACA today in the room. So we'll be taking some photos later on. ISACA has been actively promoting digital trust in the past year and a half. And everything that you see, from here point onward, I think you find us wrapping around and embracing digital trust in a big way, and simply trying to make sure that we empower not just our own members, but all the stakeholders around the world, to be able to leverage on the technologies, embrace them, and be able to make value out of them. And I'll explain a little bit more about that. We have quite a lot of members now. We have over 170,000 members, around the globe in over 188 countries. So, this is quite a big network to be able to leverage on. As you can see, I'm not academic, even though I've been teaching for over 30 years, but I always consider myself a practitioner. So everything that we talk about, hopefully will be more practical in that sense. ISACA have a lot of certifications. I won't bore you with all that. Some of you will be familiar with certain of them, but particularly CISA, has been around, for many, many years. And we recently have a lot of, certificate programs as well. So enough about, talking about, my background and the organizations that I represent. Now, what are we going to talk about today? So hopefully I'm going to bring out the fundamental elements of digital trust. And I'll talk a little bit about why do we need to consider digital trust, the professionals, the individuals around them. And also, we have developed an ecosystem for digital trust, and I'll briefly talk about that. We don't have time to go through the entire framework, with the limited time, but I'll certainly, point you to the right direction for that. Lastly, I want to talk a little bit about, the importance of ethics and integrity, in order to, have digital trust, around us. So first of all, cybersecurity is about customer trust, and I think everybody, wouldn't argue with that. Nowadays, almost all organizations that I work with is in some form of digital transformation. And whenever you're going into a digital transformation journey, a lot of, companies are basically trying to answer some of the basic questions. As you can see, you start off today and you will be asking, whether I trust the company enough to even receive or open emails, do we accept cookies from them? Do we want to have any sort of transactions with them? Do we download anything from them? Do we make payments? So there's all kinds of these kind of questions that we go through on a day-to-day basis. The most fundamental thing is, do we continue to work with these organizations, particularly if these organizations have been hacked? Now, that's a big question, if the organizations are very secure, then I think the level of trust will probably be higher. But what if, they have incidences? Now, so we'll be talking about, these kind of issues later on. So what is digital trust? ISACA has a particular definition of digital trust, and it defines digital trust as the confidence in the integrity of the relationship, interactions, and transactions among providers and consumers within an associated digital ecosystem. Now, wow, that's a big definition. There's a lot of different elements in it. So let's break it down and let's start with the very fundamental. What is trust? What is trust? Well, I actually look at it and say, well, trust is basically a confidential relationship with the unknown. And to start off with, we ask the same questions that we normally would ask. Who, what, when, why, and how? Who do we trust? Who are we talking about? Nowadays, because a lot of people are actually working from home. In fact, by 2027, there are going to be more than 50% of the people in North America going to be working fully at home instead of going to an office. Now, that's quite a lot of, digital transactions that you will have to go through because there's not a lot of face-to-face interactions anymore. What do we trust? When? Trust actually, would change depending on timing as well. Why do we trust and how do we trust? So these are fundamental questions that we often have to ask. However, trust is very subjective and very, very contextual. Very subjective because we actually have our own opinion, we have our own perceptions. We all grew up in a different environment. So all those would be factored in. And also very contextual as well. How much of these kind of different things, different facts that we actually put in to make it a perception for a particular individual. I want to start with an example. How many of you remember the days when the ATM machines were introduced and we were asked to deposit cash into the ATM? So how did you get through that trust element? I mean, you go to the bank teller, you give them cash, and you feel confident that, the cash will be recorded on your bank account. When you put it into the ATM machine, that's the kind of a leap of faith, isn't it? So how did you get through that? Do you remember that? Let me go through a different example. The second example is also quite interesting. Remember Airbnb when they first come out? No one remember what Airbnb stands for already, right? In fact, if you remember, the first one is called Airbed and Breakfast. It's Airbed like this. Yes, it's true. When they start off, these guys, these founders, they actually hire 3 airbed mattresses. That's how they start the business. 3 airbed mattresses. You know how much they're worth today? I just checked this morning, just to double check. $75 billion US. That's the market valuation now. Now, so why do we trust 3 airbed mattresses? And to make it worth $75 billion US. So there must be something in there that we can learn from, right? Now, so let's take a look at what are some of the key elements. Well, we need to we need to think about trust between strangers. This is exactly what it is. The Airbnb model is basically building trust between strangers, the host and the consumer, right? So how do we make sure that these two totally unknown strangers, how do they trust one another? This is what came out from the Airbnb website. I just take a snapshot of it from their website, all right? So they actually go quite extent to talk about how Airbnb builds trust between the host and the guest. And they have listed all kinds of criteria into it, okay? So we can learn from that. So this is what I put in as a model myself, all right? Now, so for us to actually be able to go from what we know and trust something that we don't know is usually what I call leap of faith, all right? And there are a few factors that would go into it. Usually what prompts us into it, first of all, must be the efficiency, the convenience, at least some value that we think is there. If not, then we don't even bother, right? Now, I think there are more to it because I think you will need to take a look at more about the integrity, the competency, and more importantly, the predictability. For example, what I mean by predictability, well, if I actually go to Airbnb and I'm going to rent this room, would I be safe? Would it be clean? Would it be exactly what is advertised, on the website? So something that is quite interesting is what we call the law of familiarity, right? Remember that this is a very, very powerful law that, if you are actually going into making digital trust, the law of familiarity is very, very interesting and very useful for you. Now, so in order for us to have that leap of faith, I actually think that there are three elements that we need to consider. Number one, do we trust the person? How do we know that person? How do we trust them, right? What do we do now? Well, on the internet, of course, most of us as consumers go for the ratings. We go and see, what kind of rating this person gets. And that builds up the trust element for it. Even Uber drivers, right? Everyone rates the Uber drivers, and then you can actually have some idea of how much you can trust those persons. But more importantly, I think it's the platform. The platform is actually the conduit between the two parties. And whether you have, a lot of controls and maybe, different kind of things wrapped around the platform is probably important. And that's where organizations can play a key role in making sure that they can actually provide the key elements that is necessary to conduct those type of transactions. And lastly, and in fact, some people argue this is probably the most important, is the idea. As I said earlier, whether it provides the value, the convenience, the efficiency, because otherwise you won't even put yourself into thinking about, all these at all. So why digital transformation being a key innovation enabler, and why is cybersecurity still not being prioritized? There must be something wrong with it. There must be some obstacles. So if you actually want to have a download, ISACA actually did a survey last year in 2022, and we did it again in the first quarter of this year. And we actually published the State of Digital Trust report, and you can actually download, the report. Out of this, they actually talk about the different kind of obstacles for attaining digital trust. As you can see, one of the very key aspects is lack of skills and training. And this is something that ISACA is trying very hard to provide not only to the members, but also to the community as a whole. Lack of leadership buy-in, lack of alignment with enterprise goals, lack of budget, just about all projects is the same, right? You don't have budget, you're going to have problem. Lack of technological resources and digital trust is not a priority. Now, a priority can only be a priority when you understand what it is. And again, that goes right back to the education and also the awareness programs. We also find that only 24% of them report that they actually measure digital trust. And as you know, whatever you don't measure, you're not going to be very successful in it. All right. So, this diagram actually shows you how digital trust is being measured in organizations and what are some of the popular methods of measuring digital trust. Only half, about 51% of the respondents agree that there is sufficient collaboration in the organization between professionals who are involved with digital trust. We have compliance people, we have security people, we have audit people, et cetera, et cetera. Now, all these people have to work together. Unfortunately, it's not happening at the moment. Now, so this is something that we can learn. If we actually go back to our organizations or maybe our clients, and we actually make sure that all of these teams work in a cohesive manner, then I think that would be getting us much closer to success. So for the professionals, obviously, do we want to make sure, do we actually have these people that have the right knowledge and expertise? And this is one of the key areas that ISACA is trying to address. And so we spend a lot of time trying to think about what are some of the roles that our members can actually play within this whole digital trust ecosystem. And as you can see, we have all kinds of different certifications that wrap around digital trust and all the areas from privacy, cybersecurity, assurance, the governance areas, and also risk management. All these different areas, would help us to bring all the key elements that is required to build a good digital trust within an organization. So the next couple of slides, I'm going to present to you what we expect people in the cybersecurity space and IT audit space are actually going to be able to add value to an organization. How can they help? So, for example, embedding cybersecurity in all the digital transformation projects. Many organizations, as I said, are already into that. So this is perfect timing for us to get involved and making sure that digital trust already built in from the very beginning all the way to the end of these projects. We need to spend a lot of time thinking about the recovery and the response, and therefore going through and providing resilience for organizations. We need to make sure that these are evidence-based auditable approach. That helps the IT auditor looking into it. And of course, privacy becomes very key elements nowadays, not just in North America, but everywhere around the world. We have all these privacy ordinances in Europe as well as in Asia as well. Likewise, for IT auditors, we want to make sure that they actually include within their auditing programs, the elements of looking into how digital trust is actually placed within the organization, making sure that the entire life cycle already consider digital trust in those projects. And one very key element is understanding cyber risk and controls so they can be audited effectively at the end of the day. So very briefly on the ecosystem, as I said, we actually spend quite a bit of time developing this ecosystem from professionals around the world. And there's a whole paper published on ISACA, and you can download this ecosystem framework. Some of you may remember about 15 years ago, ISACA issued something called BMIS, the Business Model for Information Security. That came out around 2008. You're not old enough to remember that, right? Yeah, I know. But this is based on the BMIS, and we have made a lot of improvements to it and add on some of the latest elements, particularly with the advancement of AI and all the emerging technologies. So this model cater with that. So what is needed to get it right? I mean, we have been going through, and digital trust is not something new. I mean, it's a new term, but I think the elements within it, as you can find, is really not too different from what we have been talking about before. Now, the key thing is that we should not be looking at it from a risk angle, but we should be looking at it from the value angle. Okay, so the quick question is we need to make sure that it's not just minimizing the impact of all the bad things that's happening, right? So it's not just focusing on, making sure that it's not getting it wrong, but how do we prove that we're actually getting it right? So some of the key factors that we think would contribute to digital trust include these things: quality, availability, security and privacy, ethics, integrity, transparency, honesty, and resilience. So, nothing too, extraordinary, right? But I think these are obviously elements that, for us to be able to build in to any digital trust program. And of course, like everything else, we always wanted it better, cheaper, and faster, all right? That's the same as anything else that we actually develop these days. So lastly, I want to go through a little bit about what are some of the things that are important in the ethics and integrity area. So if you look at this, well, I actually go to Microsoft Bing, and I just put in couple picture. And this is what come out. What's one of this picture? Very biased, isn't it? Yeah. It's not a sort of good sample of what kind of couple. I mean, you don't find too many old people here, first of all. Yeah. And most of them are white, right? Now, so yeah, and healthy. Exactly. Thank you. Thank you. So what I want to say is digital trust has a lot to do with bias. Bias data and bias parameters are the rule nowadays rather than the exception. Okay? So because data are produced by humans, and we actually have bias within ourselves. Now, so this is something very important, because when we develop AI and generative AI, and I'm sure that later on the speakers on these topics later on will expand into it. But how do we make sure that these bias are not already packaged within it? Now, that's something very important for us to be able to build on within digital trust. So this is also very interesting. I actually find that there are some designers, they were so worried about people copying, their artwork. And so they come up with something what they call data poisoning tool, and it's called Nightshade. All right, you can Google it. And so what they're doing is that they're actually intentionally putting into some of these data sets and trying to poison it, so that if someone is trying to copy, their design, then it would come out to be something totally different. Now, again, for us as auditor, if some of you are going to be auditing these data sets, you need to be making sure that, how do we actually get rid of them? Very difficult, I can tell you. Once these are put into the data sets, it's very difficult to identify them and be able to actually, screen them out. Very difficult. But again, that goes into, providing what digital trust is all about. I'm down to my final few slides. I just want to share this. I was in Dublin, in Ireland, a week ago. and just trying to, go through some of the, we had a digital trust, we have a digital trust world conference over there. And one of the speakers talked about, what are the key requirements for trustworthy AI. And I thought that is quite an interesting thing to share with you, because it comes out from, this independent high-level expert group on artificial intelligence. I've never heard of them before. But I thought, what was included is quite useful. They talk about some of the key elements, including human in the loop, the technical robustness and safety, privacy, data governance, transparency, diversity, non-discrimination, accountability, and societal and environmental well-being. I think these are key elements that we need to consider, when we are looking into, putting together the digital trust framework. Finally, digital trust based on ethics. This is a model that I actually find that, again, is quite useful. You can actually take a look at it. It talks about 8 different sort of risk risk zones. And when you're actually putting in, developing any project and trying to build digital trust within it, I think these are the 8 areas that if you try to consider, you'll find it very useful. For example, you'll find that, like this one, the first one, trust disinformation and propaganda. You can see that there's a lot of, deep fake, photos and videos and all that. Nowadays, all you have to do is to capture someone's image and also taking the voice, and you can actually put a video within about 10 seconds, all right, and pretend to be someone like that. So you can actually have even a Zoom meeting with that person, but in fact, it's not the real person, and the technology is going to be getting better and better later on. So my final slide, what is ISACA's role in digital trust? As you can see, ISACA is trying to make sure that we provide all the right tools and resources, providing the training, the expertise, and most importantly, the guidance, for our members and also all the stakeholders around the world. I think we'll continue to do that. If you go to our ISACA website, you'll be going to see more and more of these kind of publications on digital trust coming out, in the next few years. And with that, I would close with my last slide, which talks about a few of the documents that I think would be very useful to you. And, you are welcome to download these, from the ISACA website. So that concludes my my talk, and we're exactly 12 o'clock, so we're right at lunchtime. Thank you.